She said it in front of 3 of her friends, loud enough that the laughter hit me like a slap. They were at the kitchen island, wine glasses half full, music low. I wasn't supposed to be home yet. I had finished work early, walked in quietly, and overheard her say, "I just need space. He's holding me back. I feel like I can't breathe around him anymore." The others laughed, the kind of brittle high-pitched laughter people use when they want to show they agree. My wife, Emma, took a sip of wine and shook her head like she was tired of carrying me. I stood in the hallway, keys still in my hand, boots dusty from work. She didn't see me, not yet, and I didn't move. I just listened. If you've ever heard someone you love describe you as a burden, you don't forget the tone. The way it erases years in a single breath. Subscribe for more stories like this if you haven't already. I didn't announce myself. I didn't interrupt. I waited until they were talking about something else. A show someone recommended, and then I stepped forward, smiled at all of them, kissed Emma lightly on the temple, and said dinner smelled good even though nothing was cooking. She froze for half a second. Just one. And then she smiled like everything was normal. She poured me a glass of water and asked about my day. I answered. I laughed at the right moments. I set the table. I pretended not to notice how her friends avoided eye contact with me. After they left, she didn't bring it up. I didn't either. But something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not even sadness. Something quieter. Something firm. The next morning, she told me she was taking a self-discovery trip. Just that. No explanation. No reason that made sense. "I need to figure out who I am," she said while folding clothes into a suitcase I hadn't seen her use since our honeymoon. "I need space. Time. Clarity." I nodded. I asked how long. She said she didn't know. Maybe a few weeks. A month. The old me. The version of myself who built furniture for our house with my own hands, who filled the pantry, who fixed her car when it broke, would have begged, would have asked what I did wrong, would have fought for us. But I remembered her voice in that kitchen. "He's holding me back. I just need space." So I gave her exactly what she asked for. I drove her to the airport, carried her bag. I hugged her goodbye. She smiled like she had already moved on. When I got home, I sat in the living room where her laughter had once felt like the best sound in the world. The house was too quiet. I looked at the framed photos on the shelves, the couch we picked out together, the paint color she insisted on, the blanket she draped over the armrest just so. And I realized something. None of it felt like mine. I had built a life for a version of us that didn't exist anymore. The next morning, before the sun came up, I called a realtor, the one who handled most of the properties in our neighborhood. She remembered me, said she had always admired how much care I'd put into our place. I asked how quickly the house could sell. She said in this market very quickly. She came that afternoon. I cleaned while she walked through, took notes, and nodded approvingly. She asked if I was sure. I told her I was. We signed the listing agreement. I sat in the kitchen afterward, the same place I'd heard my wife say I was too small for her life. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the cabinets I had installed myself. I ran my thumb across the edge of the counter, the one I sanded 3 times because I wanted it to be perfect. And I felt nothing, only quiet, the kind of quiet that comes with certainty. No yelling, no begging, no dramatic confrontation, just a door quietly closing on a chapter one had already stopped wanting. That night, I slept in our bed alone. Or maybe I should say I realized I had been sleeping alone long before she ever left. The space beside me had been empty for a long time. I woke up early the next day. I packed my tools, my keepsakes, the things that were truly mine. I boxed the rest neatly, not out of affection, out of respect for who I used to be. Took 2 days. By the time the 3rd day came, the house didn't look like ours anymore. It looked like something waiting to pass on to someone else. On the 4th day, I locked the front door and stepped outside. The yard was quiet, the morning air cool. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The house wasn't home anymore. I didn't tell Emma. I didn't send a message. I didn't warn her. I simply moved on. And the real twist hadn't even happened yet. That comes when she returns. I didn't move far at first. There's a strange quiet that follows the moment you stop holding on to something that was already gone. I rented a small apartment across town, Nothing special, one bedroom, a view of a parking lot, walls that echoed because I didn't bring much with me. I didn't need much. A mattress, a table, a chair, my tools. That was enough. The realtor called me 2 days later to tell me there were already multiple offers on the house. A young couple, newly married, expecting their first child, loved it the moment they walked in. They saw a possibility where I only saw memory. I accepted their offer without hesitation. The paperwork moved quickly, faster than I expected. Signatures, notarized pages, wire transfers. A home, especially one built by your own hands, should feel permanent. But that's an illusion. Nothing is permanent when only one person holds on. I didn't think much about Emma while this was happening. Not in the emotional sense. I thought of her only in a practical way. What to pack, what to leave, what technically belonged to her. I handled it with the same methodical calm I used when I worked on a complicated build. Slow, precise, steady. She hadn't called me. Not once. There had been no texts, no questions, no check-ins. She got the space she wanted, and she used it completely. I didn't track her location. I didn't snoop. I didn't look at her social pages. The only time I saw proof of her was in the background of someone else's post. Her laughing with someone I didn't know, a drink in her hand, the kind of freedom she said she needed glimmering on her face. I didn't feel anger, just distance, like watching someone I used to know from across the street. While the house was closing, I also met with my lawyer. A man with a plain office, no cheap motivational posters, no fake plants. He spoke clearly, no wasted words. He wasn't surprised by the divorce. He said he had seen hundreds like it. People grow apart or someone grows out without telling the other person. It happens slowly, then all at once. We filled out the paperwork. No children meant no custody. No shared debts, no complicated assets besides the house. It was clean, simple, just signatures and time. When he asked if I wanted to request spousal support or any financial settlement, I said no. I didn't want anything from her. Not even money. I just wanted the quiet. The lawyer nodded like he understood that better than most. While the filings began processing, I took another step, one Emma would never see coming. I transferred my business. It was a small custom woodworking shop I had built with my own 2 hands, one piece of furniture at a time. I didn't shut it down. I scaled it. I moved it into a shared workspace in another city an hour away, closer to a place where handmade work was appreciated and paid for. The old space had been near friends of hers, neighbors of hers, a life of hers. The new one was mine. I rented a truck, loaded my equipment, my lumber, the workbench that had grooves worn into it from years of shaping and sanding. My friend Mark helped me move. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He just lifted, carried, and nodded when I thanked him. Sometimes you don't need advice. You just need someone who knows when to be silent. The first night in the new workshop, I ran my hand along the workbench and felt something I hadn't in a while. Room to breathe. Not the kind of space Emma meant. Not escape. Not running away. Just oxygen. Clarity. A life that didn't revolve around someone else's shifting desires. I started working again. Not out of distraction, but out of grounding. Wood doesn't lie to you. It doesn't pretend. It doesn't claim to love you one day and resent you the next. If you treat it right, it becomes something stronger than it was. If you rush it, force it, ignore its grain, it breaks. There was something comforting in that simplicity. 2 weeks passed. I got a call from the realtor. The sale finalized. The money was transferred. The title changed hands. Just like that, the place I once imagined raising children in now belonged to someone else. I should have felt sadness. I didn't. I felt movement. Next came the step that mattered most. The step I took not out of spite, not out of revenge, but out of closure. I drove to Emma's parents' house. They lived 30 minutes away in an older neighborhood where the trees grew thick and the air always smelled like pine. Her father opened the door before I even knocked. He'd heard. Maybe from her. Maybe from the realtor. Maybe he had just sensed the shift. He didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised. He just stepped aside and let me in. I placed the luggage, her luggage, heavy, familiar, beside the guest room door. Inside were her clothes, her jewelry, the things she valued enough to pack but not enough to carry through a marriage. On top of the main suitcase, I placed the envelope. Not the divorce papers yet. Not the final note. Just a letter. My handwriting was neat, steady, not shaking. I wrote about the 5 years we had shared. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. I wrote that people change, and sometimes love becomes something else. Something heavy. Something that suffocates instead of supports. I wrote that she wanted space, and I understood now what that meant. When I finished, her father stood in the doorway. He didn't say she was wrong. He didn't defend her. He simply said, "You were good to her," and hearing that from him meant more than hearing it from her ever would. I nodded, thanked him, and walked out to my truck. The sky was beginning to darken. The world looked wide, open. I drove back to the workshop, parked, locked up, and stood outside for a moment. The air felt different, clearer, and she still had no idea what waited for her when she came home. She returned on a Thursday afternoon. I know because her sister texted me not to give a warning, but almost like a heads up from someone who didn't want to be in the blast radius. "She's landing today," the message said. No emojis, no judgment, just information. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I wasn't planning to be anywhere near the old house when she arrived. I imagined her rolling her suitcase from the arrivals hall, expecting me to be waiting with a quiet smile and a car that smelled like the pine-scented freshener she liked. She probably expected to see me standing by the curb, waving like always. Instead, she ordered a rideshare. She didn't call me. I guess in her mind, the distance had already been justified. The house she pulled up to wasn't hers anymore. The front yard had changed. The porch lights were different. There was a child's bicycle leaning against the railing. She must have felt something was off before she even tried the key. Maybe the lock looked too new, the welcome mat too clean, the window curtains not ones she remembered buying. But she still tried the door, her suitcase waiting behind her like a loyal dog. The key didn't turn. I know how that moment feels. The hesitation, the twist, the disbelief, the way your mind scrambles to make sense of something that doesn't fit the world you thought you were living in. She knocked. I'm told she tried calling my phone then, once, twice, maybe 3 times in quick taps, like panic hadn't fully taken hold yet, but was forming. I didn't answer. I was in the workshop, sanding down the edge of a walnut tabletop, the dust rising in slow clouds that settled across the bench. It wasn't that I was ignoring her. It was that I didn't belong in that moment anymore. A woman answered the door. The new owner. Younger than us. Kind eyes. Baby in her arms. I can picture Emma freezing, caught between confusion, disbelief, and the creeping horror of realizing the ground has shifted. "Can I help you?" the woman must have asked. And Emma, who has always been composed even when she cried, must have tried to hold on to something like dignity. "This is my house," she probably said. A statement said by someone trying to force reality to obey. But reality doesn't work like that. The woman, from what I was told later, spoke gently. "We purchased it 3 weeks ago. I'm sorry. I think you should talk to your husband." I don't know what Emma said next. Maybe she swayed where she stood. Maybe her breath caught. Maybe she just nodded and stepped back, pulling her suitcase behind her the way you drag something heavier than its weight. She called her sister then. Not me. Her sister is the one who drove to pick her up. And that's where the real unraveling began. Because her sister drove her not to the old home, not to mine, but to her parents' house. And waiting in the spare bedroom, stacked neatly against the far wall, were her suitcases. The ones she had packed for her self-discovery trip. Except now they contained everything she owned. Her clothes folded, her jewelry organized, her books, her perfume, the framed photo of her grandmother she kept on her nightstand. All of it arranged with the kind of care that comes from respect, not attachment. On top of the largest suitcase was the envelope I had written before. The letter. I don't know how quickly she opened it. I don't know if her hands shook. I didn't need to know. I only know what I wrote. That I didn't hate her. That I understood. That love cannot survive where resentment breathes. That I wasn't angry she wanted more from her life. But I couldn't be the foundation she built it on while calling me the weight around her ankles. I told her I heard her. I told her I let go. The divorce papers were not in that envelope. Not yet. Those came next. She called me the first time that evening. I didn't answer. She called again, hours later. Then, in the middle of the night, one call that lasted until voicemail picked up. And then silence. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't feel restless. There are times when peace and numbness look very similar. The next morning, her father called. Not angry, not emotional, just tired. "She wants to talk," he said. I didn't ask what she was feeling. It would have been irrelevant. Wanting to talk is not the same as understanding. Wanting to talk is not the same as taking responsibility. Wanting to talk is often just wanting the world back the way it was. But that world was already gone. "I'll meet her," I said. I chose a cafe near the river. Somewhere quiet, open, public enough that neither of us could raise our voices, close enough to the water that the sound of the current would fill any silence. I arrived first. I sat outside. The wind was cool, the sky overcast but calm. I watched the water drift. I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel angry. I just felt present. She arrived a few minutes later. Her hair tied back, no makeup, sunglasses she pushed up onto her head. She looked smaller. Not physically, but in the way someone does when life has just removed the walls they leaned on. She sat across from me. For a moment she didn't speak. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her eyes searched mine like she was trying to find the version of me she thought was still there. "Why?" she finally asked. I didn't laugh. I didn't sigh. I didn't show pain. I just answered. "Because you said you needed space." She flinched. Not dramatically, but like the words struck a nerve. "I didn't mean," she started, but I interrupted gently. "You did. People say things they don't mean in anger." But she hadn't been angry. She had been comfortable, relaxed, laughing. "I didn't think you would just leave," she said, voice thin now. I nodded once. That was the problem. She looked down. Her breath shook. And for the first time, I saw what I hadn't seen in a long time. Her vulnerability wasn't performance. This was real. But real didn't mean reparable. The silence between us was long. Not hostile, just final. She wiped her eyes once. No sobbing, no begging, just quiet grief. Grief for something she realized only after it was gone. "Is there someone else?" she finally asked. It wasn't accusatory, just human. I thought about the people I had met in the workshop. The woman who ran the print shop next door who laughed quietly and didn't make everything a competition. The sense of peace I felt in my own company. I shook my head. "No," I said. "There doesn't need to be someone else." I didn't add the rest. It was enough that I had myself again. She nodded. A slow, resigned movement. And then she said something so soft I almost didn't hear it. "I thought you would always be there." And there it was, the truth beneath all of it. She didn't want me. She wanted the guarantee of me. But I am not a safety net. I am not a permanent fixture in someone else's background. I am a person. I stood up. She didn't ask me to stay. She didn't touch my hand. She just watched me go, tears breaking quietly, like something inside her had finally cracked open. I walked away without looking back. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because the caring had already done its job. I drove back to the workshop after the cafe. The air smelled like sawdust and mineral oil, something warm and grounding. I didn't sit down right away. I just stood in the middle of the space I had built from the splintered remains of another life. The light through the high windows settled in slow stripes across the floor. I could still feel the quiet weight of her last words. "I thought you would always be there." It stayed with me, not as pain, but as recognition of a truth I hadn't wanted to see. She hadn't just taken me for granted. She had assumed permanence. Assumed love would continue even without effort. Assumed words spoken casually among friends wouldn't have consequences. But everything has a cost. And silence is not the absence of action. Silence can be the sharpest blade in the drawer. I spent that evening working, not to avoid anything, but because shaping would felt like shaping myself again. Sanding, planing, fitting joints, smoothing edges. Hours passed without me noticing. When I finally locked up and stepped outside, the sky was deep blue fading into night. The kind of night where everything feels too large and too quiet. I didn't go back to the apartment. Instead, I drove to the river, the same one near the cafe, but farther down where the banks opened wide and no one walked the paths at night. I sat on the hood of my truck and watched the dark water move. I don't know how long I stayed there. Time felt stretched, the past and present finally settling into their places. No longing, no aching, just release. She had once been the person I woke up early for, worked overtime for, imagined a family with. But love can fade long before people say it out loud. What I mourned wasn't her. It was the version of myself that believed love was enough by itself. I stayed at the river until the first hint of morning touched the horizon. Then I drove back to the apartment, showered, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the divorce papers. The final set was ready. I had picked them up that morning from my lawyer. All that was left was to deliver them. But the way I delivered them mattered. This wasn't revenge. Revenge would have meant I still cared about how she saw me. I didn't. I wasn't looking to destroy her. I wasn't interested in embarrassment, shouting, or theatrical closure. I wanted clarity, a moment that left no room for misunderstanding. A gesture that said, "The door is closed, not slammed, not locked with chains, just closed, and I am gone from the other side." I knew where she was, the same place her luggage had been taken, her parents' house, not because she needed comfort, but because there was nowhere else for her to go now that the illusion of her old life was gone. I didn't call. I didn't text. I drove. The neighborhood was quiet when I arrived. Early morning quiet, the kind where the world hasn't fully woken up yet. Her father was outside watering the lawn. He saw me pull up, turned off the hose, and just stood there, waiting. He didn't look disappointed. He didn't look angry. He just looked tired in the way men look when they've seen life take shapes they didn't expect. I stepped out of the truck and approached him. We didn't shake hands. We didn't exchange greetings. We didn't need to. I held the envelope in my hand. Thick, final. I told him, "She doesn't need to sign now. The petition is filed. This is just to acknowledge it." He nodded. His voice was rough when he spoke. "She cried last night." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because nothing I could say would make that cry sharper or softer. It was hers to feel. "She didn't understand," he added. I looked past him toward the house. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn. "She didn't try to understand," I said, and that was the truth. He didn't defend her. Instead, he said something I hadn't expected. "You were the best thing that happened to her. She just didn't know how to keep what was good." I didn't let that land as validation. I didn't need validation, but I appreciated the clarity in his voice. He reached out and took the envelope. His hand lingered for a moment. "This will break her," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No, this will show her where the breaking began." I turned to leave. I had taken 3 steps when I heard the screen door open. I didn't need to look to know it was her, but I did. Emma stood there on the porch. Eyes swollen, hair uncombed, wearing a sweatshirt that didn't belong to her, probably her sister's. There are moments when a look says everything words can't. Her eyes held shock, yes, but not surprise. Somewhere inside her, she had known this was coming. She just never believed I would be the one to choose the ending. We didn't approach each other. We didn't speak. There was no dramatic moment, no reaching out, no collapsing into arms. Just distance. Real, visible, irreversible distance. She opened her mouth once, maybe to say my name, maybe to apologize, maybe to ask me not to go. I'll never know, because I didn't wait for the words. I simply nodded, not in anger, not in farewell, but in acknowledgement of something finished. I got back into the truck. I drove away, and I didn't look in the mirror, because the past was behind me, and it was no longer mine to carry. I didn't plan to build a new life quickly. I didn't go searching for some grand transformation or dramatic rebirth. I just kept moving one small step at a time until distance formed naturally between the person I had been and the person I was becoming. The workshop became my anchor, the smell of wood shavings, the vibration of sanding blocks, the steady grip of chisels. Those things reminded me that I existed outside of anyone else's expectations. Most people don't realize how loud the world is until they step into quiet. The quiet makes you look at yourself. Really look. not as someone's husband or someone's disappointment or someone who needs to be more than he is, but simply as a person who breathes and wakes and moves forward. 3 weeks passed. Then another. I settled into the new city like it had been waiting for me. I found a diner I liked, the kind where the servers learn your order by heart after the second visit. I found a hardware store where the clerk knew the difference between cedar and chestnut by smell alone. I found a trail by the river I walked every morning before the sun got too high. I didn't think of Emma every day, and when I did, it wasn't with longing. It was with distance, like remembering someone from a story you once told yourself. Around that time, I met someone. Not in the romantic sense, not yet, not even close. Her name was Sarah. She ran the print shop next to my workspace. She printed business cards, wedding invitations, posters for local events. Her laugh was quiet but real. She didn't fill silence with noise. She didn't pry. She didn't try to fix anything. One afternoon, she stopped by my shop to ask if I could fix a wooden picture frame someone had dropped off that had cracked along the joint. I said yes. She waited while I repaired it. We didn't talk much, just worked side by side. When I finished, she smiled. Not a polite smile, but one that reached her eyes. She said, "You look lighter than when you moved in." I didn't know anyone had noticed. I didn't know I had changed enough for it to show. I didn't respond. I just nodded. She didn't push for more. That was the first time in months I realized I wasn't holding tension in my jaw. The next day, the lawyer called. The divorce was officially processed. All that remained was the final signature of acknowledgement. And the delivery. I sat with the documents for a while, considering how to send them. I could have mailed them. I could have dropped them off at her parents' house. I could have texted her. But this story needed an ending. Clear. Complete. Not cruel. Just true. So I put everything into one final package. The divorce papers, signed and stamped. A photograph, taken by one of the neighboring workshop owners, of me and Sarah outside the print shop. We weren't touching. We weren't posed like a couple. We were just standing side by side, laughing at something that had probably been nothing. But I looked alive. I looked like someone who had returned to himself. That was the point. And on top of the papers and the photo, I placed one handwritten note. Short, steady. You needed space. I took you at your word. I drove it myself. Not to her parents' house. Not to where she might have been waiting, but to her sister's house. The same sister who had watched everything quietly, without choosing sides. She answered the door. She didn't look surprised to see me. She just stepped aside and let me place the package on the hallway table. "She's not here," her sister said. I nodded. "It's okay. This isn't something I need to hand her." Her sister looked at the envelope, then back at me. "She knows she lost something real," she said. I didn't answer, because whether or not she knew didn't change anything. I thanked her and left. I didn't look back as I walked down the steps. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for any reaction. The story had ended already. The rest was just echoes. That night, I returned to the river. The air was cool, the water steady. I stood with my hands in my pockets and let the quiet settle in again. Not numbness, not emptiness, just space. My space. The kind you build for yourself. The kind that isn't given because someone demanded it, but because you finally learned how to breathe without shrinking for someone else. And in that stillness, I understood something important. I hadn't disappeared. I hadn't been erased. I hadn't been abandoned. I had simply stepped out of the place where I was no longer seen, and into a life where I existed again. If you listened this far, thank you. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, real, quiet, and true.